Chapter 3 of The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barony. The Trail of the Lonesome Pine by John Fox Jr. Chapter 3. On one side he had left the earth yellow with the coming noon, but it was still morning as he went down on the other side. The laurel and rhododendron still reeked with dew in the deep ever-shaded ravine. The ferns drenched his stirrups as he brushed through them, and each dripping tree-top broke the sunlight and let it drop in tent-like beams through the shimmering undermist. A bird flashed here and there through the green gloom, but there was no sound in the air but the footfalls of his horse and the easy creaking of leather under him, the drip of dew overhead and the running of water below. Now and then he could see the same slender footprints in the rich loam, and he saw them in the sand where the first tiny brook tinkled across the path from a gloomy ravine. There the little creature had taken a flying leap across it, and beyond he could see the prints no more. He little guessed that while he halted to let his horse drink, the girl lay on a rock above him, looking down. She was nearer home now and was less afraid, so she had slipped from the trail and climbed above it there to watch him pass. As he went on, she slid from her perch and with cat-footed quiet followed him. When he reached the river, she saw him pull in his horse and eagerly bend forward, looking into a pool just below the crossing. There was a bass down there in the clear water, a big one, and the man whistled cheerily and dismounted, tying his horse to a sassafras bush and unbuckling a tin bucket and a curious-looking net from his saddle. With the net in one hand and the bucket in the other, he turned back up the creek, and passed so close to where she had slipped aside into the bushes that she came near shrieking. But his eyes were fixed on a pool of the creek above, and to her wonder he strolled straight into the water with his boots on, pushing the net in front of him. He was a raider, sure, she thought now, and he was looking for a moonshine still. And the wild little thing in the bushes smiled cunningly. There was no still up that creek, and as he had left his horse below and his gun, she waited for him to come back, which he did by and by, dripping and soaked to his knees. Then she saw him untie the queer gun on his saddle, pull it out of a case, and her eyes got big with wonder, take it to pieces and make it into a long limber rod. In a moment he had cast a minnow into the pool and waded out into the water up to his hips. She had never seen so queer a fishing pole, so queer a fisherman. How could he get a fish out with that little switch, she thought contemptuously. By and by something hummed queerly, the man gave a slight jerk, and a shining fish flopped 2 feet into the air. It was surely very queer, for the man didn't put his rod over his shoulder and walk ashore, as did the mountaineers, but stood still, winding something with one hand, and again the fish would flash into the air, and then that humming would start again while the fisherman would stand quiet and waiting for a while, and then he would begin to wind again. In her wonder, she rose unconsciously to her feet, and a stone rolled down to the ledge below her. The fisherman turned his head and she started to run, but without a word he turned again to the fish he was playing. Moreover, he was too far out in the water to catch her, so she advanced slowly, even to the edge of the stream, watching the fish cut half circles about the man. If he saw her, he gave no notice, and it was well that he did not. He was pulling the bass to and fro now through the water, tiring him out, drowning him, stepping backward at the same time, and a moment later the fish slid easily out of the edge of the water, gasping along the edge of a low sandbank, and the fisherman reaching down with one hand caught him in the gills. Then he looked up and smiled, and she had seen no smile like that before. "Howdy, little girl." One bare toe went burrowing suddenly into the sand. One finger went to her red mouth, and that was all. She merely stared at him straight in the eye, and he smiled again. "Cat got your tongue?" Her eyes fell at the ancient banter, but she lifted them straightway and stared again. "You live around here?" She stared on. "Where?" No answer. What's your name, little girl?" And still she stared. "Oh, well, of course, you can't talk if the cat's got your tongue." The steady eyes leaped angrily, but there was still no answer, and he bent to take the fish off his hook, put on a fresh minnow, turned his back, and tossed it into the pool. "It ain't." He looked up again. She surely was a pretty little thing, and more now that she was angry. "I should say not," he said teasingly. "What did you say your name was?" "What's your name?" The fisherman laughed. He was just becoming accustomed to the mountain etiquette that commands a stranger to divulge himself first. "My name's Jack." "And mine's Jill." She laughed now, and it was his time for surprise. Where could she have heard of Jack and Jill? His line rang suddenly. "Jack," she cried, "you got a bite." He pulled, missed the strike, and wound in. The minnow was all right, so he tossed it back again. "That isn't your name," he said. "If 'tain't, then that 'tain't yourn." "Yes, 'tis," he said, shaking his head affirmatively. A long cry came down the ravine. "June! Hey-o, June!" That was a queer name for the mountains, and the fisherman wondered if he had heard aright. June! The little girl gave a shrill answering cry, but she did not move. "Thar now," she said. "Who's that? Your mammy?" "No, 'tain't. Hit's my step-mammy. I'm a goin' to ketch hell now." Her innocent eyes turned sullen and her baby mouth tightened. "Good Lord!" said the fisherman, startled, and then he stopped. The words were as innocent on her lips as a benediction. "Have you got a father?" Like a flash her whole face changed. "I reckon I have." "Where is he?"
"Here he is,"
drawled a voice from the bushes, and it had a tone that made the fisherman whirl suddenly. A giant mountaineer stood on the bank above him, with a Winchester in the hollow of his arm. "How are you?" The giant's heavy eyes lifted quickly, but he spoke to the girl.
"You go on home. What you doin' here gassin' with furriners?"
The girl shrank to the bushes, but she cried sharply back.
"Don't you hurt him now, Dad. He ain't even got a pistol. He ain't no—"
"Shet up."
The little creature vanished, and the mountaineer turned to the fisherman, who had just put on a fresh minnow and tossed it into the river.
"Purty well, thank you," he said shortly. "How are you?"
"Fine," was the nonchalant answer. For a moment there was silence, and a puzzled frown gathered on the mountaineer's face. "That's a bright little girl of yours. What did she mean by telling you not to hurt me?"
"You haven't been long in these mountains, have you?"
"No, not in these mountains. Why?" The fisherman looked around and was almost startled by the fierce gaze of his questioner. "Stop that, please," he said with a humorous smile. "You make me nervous." The mountaineer's bushy brows came together across the bridge of his nose, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder.
"What's your name, stranger, and what's your business over here?"
"Dear me, there you go. You can see I'm fishin', but why does everybody in these mountains want to know my name?"
"You heard me."
"Yes." The fisherman turned again and saw the giant's rugged face stern and pale with open anger now, and he too grew suddenly serious. "Suppose I don't tell you," he said gravely. "What—"
"Git,"
said the mountaineer, with a move of one huge hairy hand up the mountain,
"and git quick."
The fisherman never moved, and there was the click of a shell thrown into place in the Winchester and a guttural oath from the mountaineer's beard.
"Damn ye,"
he said hoarsely, raising the rifle.
"I'll give ye—"
"Don't, Dad!"
shrieked a voice from the bushes.
"I know his name. It's Jack."
The rest of the name was unintelligible. The mountaineer dropped the butt of his gun to the ground and laughed.
"Oh, are you the engineer?"
The fisherman was angry now. He had not moved hand or foot, and he said nothing, but his mouth was set hard and his bewildered blue eyes had a glint in them that the mountaineer did not at the moment see. He was leaning with one arm on the muzzle of his Winchester. His face had suddenly become suave and shrewd, and now he laughed again.
"So you're Jack Hale, air ye?"
The fisherman spoke.